Hey guys, what's up? So this video is brought to you by Dev Mountain Coding Bootcamp. If you guys are trying to get into software development, iOS development, software QA, and other stuff, check out the link in the description tab below. They are offering courses. You can actually live on campus over there. They are hooked up with employers around the country, around the world really, and they're going to help you try to find your first job in this industry. So make sure you give them a look, Dev Mountain Coding Bootcamp, and the link is in the description tab below. Hey guys, all right, so the reason why you want to learn Python is Python's been around for a long time. It's actually been around for nearly 30 years. It was originally created in 1990 by a guy named Guido van Rossum, and he is a mathematician, and he really brought a lot of, really like math core concepts into Python, and really brought in the really the beautiful type syntax that Python has and is credited for, because he used more of like a mathematic type of an approach to do it. And during the time, we should probably mention the other popular programming language, which was coming up around the same time, which was Perl. And this language actually became much more popular than Python throughout the 90s and early 2000s, and just recently started falling from grace. But one of the problems with Python when you can, or with Perl when you compare it to Python, and this was a big dispute that like raged on for really decades, was that Python was just simply much easier to use, and Perl was really sloppy, because with Perl, there's so many different ways of doing the same thing, and like you can be really, really creative, because Larry Wall, the creator, was a linguist. So Perl was all about like giving the programmer ultimate flexibility to do whatever it is they wanted to do. So Perl programmers could be very, very creative and write stuff like that nobody else could understand. And it was very easy to do that. And the same can be said for like languages like C and stuff like that. But that was the problem with Perl. So Python ended up becoming popular because it was created by a mathematician as opposed to a linguist, and the language was just fundamentally designed a little bit better. And the Python community typically had one way of doing it. So there's multiple ways of doing something, but there was like, but typically when you're looking something up, there's like one Python way of doing it, and they call it the Pythonic way, or like, but it's typically the right way that like the Python community says, oh, okay, if you're going to iterate a list or two lists at the same time or something like that, then this is going to be the way to do it. All right, so another reason why you want to learn Python is as of February of 2019, Python is in the third place according to the TOBE index of the most popular languages and like the most widely used out there. And when you compare it to like C, there's going to be a lot of C stuff in here, but this is a little bit misleading because there's just not as many like C developer jobs as there are Python. But there's a ton of C++ jobs, and JavaScript probably leads the pack with jobs and all of this, to be honest with you. But anyway, I don't know that this is reflective of the job market, to be honest. But so according to Google Trends, as of like 2004, you can see it is trending up. And if you compare it to something like C#, you can see that it's sort of trending down, as well as Java. But depending on how you search for things, like if you do like ES6 with JavaScript, you can see that there's this like humongous bump. So really, I'm not sure how accurate Google Trends is either. So honestly, I think one of the best gauges is probably Indeed.com. If you look at the available job listings on the #1 job website, if you search for like Python, you're going to get roughly 60,000 jobs available in the United States right now for Python. If you were to type C#, you're going to get roughly 30,000, but if you do .NET, it's going to be more like 55,000. If you put in ASP.NET or MVC.NET or all the different .NET technologies, I think that there's about the same amount of Java jobs as well, roughly like 60-some thousand. So really, the top three languages out there right now are C#, Java, and Python when it comes to jobs, and then JavaScript as well. And JavaScript may be ahead of all of those just because the web is so big. So the one thing to note about Python is that one of the reasons for its explosion is the data science field. And this is typically a field that's going to require an advanced degree, at least a bachelor's degree, most likely a master's degree. And it's going to be a lot of data, just like data cleansing and things like that. And the algorithms themselves probably don't change as frequently. Obviously it's just the data translations that needed to occur. And data science itself is like what's driving machine learning and artificial intelligence, and Python is leading the way there because of its ease of use. It's great for like, physicists and things that aren't natural programmers to come in and just start being able to pick up on it quickly and use it for their scientific calculations. And that's why Python's taking off. But again, that's probably not the best thing for self-taught Python devs. You're not really, unless you can prove you're really a master at Python, you're probably not going to get one of those jobs. And let's be honest, I mean, some of the math involved in everything is just not for everybody. But Python's not only used for data science, and it's not actually what got Python popular in the first place. Python really started getting popular with the advent of frameworks. So when Ruby on Rails came out, roughly the same time, the Python community created Django. And Django was used to create Pinterest, Instagram, Reddit, and even YouTube. So really, a correction on Reddit, it didn't use Django, but it's built with Python. And then as far as like Pinterest, I mean, some of those frameworks don't actually still use the Django framework itself because they outgrew it. But Pinterest was definitely started on Django. Now, Python's also used for game development. Panda 3D is a pretty popular game engine out there. It has a small community, but it's still pretty active. And you can actually write your game engine and game code and everything in Python. Although the core library or the library of the game framework itself is all written in like C++. But you can see here, this is just Python code. So Python's basically a wrapper around the C++ code, and you're writing Python, but it's really just calling a bunch of C++ stuff. Now, if you wanted to get started with machine learning with Python, I would recommend that you probably use like a product like Anaconda, which is just a distribution of Python. That's going to have all of the like scientific libraries and things that you need to install and configure and have all the dependencies working and everything. It's a nightmare to set up, especially on Windows. But if you just like download the Anaconda distribution, it comes with Python and it'll have all that stuff installed for you. And then like an alternative is like ActiveState does the same type of thing. So Python can be used for actual software development as well, using the popular Qt framework, and this is a big thing which has like both commercial support and like there's some free licenses out there as well. But Python has a port to this that allows you to use Python to write some of this Qt code where you can make use of this modern UI development tool for actual software applications. So if you're going to build something complex like a Photoshop or something like that that people need to install on their machine, you could use Python to do that, and you would probably want to use Qt. And the two together is how you would make your software that you distribute. So I should also mention in the mid to late 90s when Google was cropping up, they actually chose Python to be the language of their original search engine and really their core infrastructure. So Python's a really good language when it comes to like tying servers together and things like that, because that's what Google did for the longest time, and it was all Python. Eventually they started bringing C++, and because they needed faster computing. But even to this day, Google's core infrastructure uses a ton of Python. So between that and IBM, that may be like the two biggest reasons why Python was able to take off and surpass Perl and really gain like a huge community. And Google later ended up employing the creator of Python. And then finally, Python can also be used for like data scraping, so any sort of data management. Like if you have to go and collect data on the web or something like that, I've created so many different Python scripts that can just go out across the web and like do automated tasks and things like that of communicating with servers, grabbing data, storing it in a file somewhere or something like that, reading the file, doing something with it. You can do all that stuff, have it all based on timers, automate your entire life from everything from like looking for particular emails and things like that. So like I've actually read in books, like there was this one competition where you have to like basically like try to submit a form or something at a particular time or something like that. And this was like in like the late 90s when I was reading this book. It wasn't when I was reading the book, but when like the book was written and when he was talking about the author. And basically back in those days, he was able to just create like a simple Perl script, and he ended up winning some sort of competition because it just like fired off to the server like every second or 2 seconds or something like that. And back in those days, like they didn't really check for that type of thing, and they probably shouldn't even have had a competition so easy to basic hacking or whatever. But that is the type of thing that is also used. Like it's heavily used. Python's heavily used for those types of tasks is what I'm trying to say. So as a network administrator, as any sort of server maintenance guy, data guy, whatever, automation, then Python's a great language for that. So Essentially, you can use Python for almost anything out there. It's not going to be the best language for everything. You're not going to use it to write a core game engine because simply put, Python's not fast enough. But it's fast enough for most development tasks out there, and that's why it's as popular as it is, because in many cases you don't need like the absolute most speed. The only time you really need that is when you're dealing with maximum graphics and like game engine stuff like that. So or huge calculations maybe on like a supercomputer or something like that. But either way, you're not really going to use Python for a lot of that stuff. But you'd be surprised though, even with big data, when you're dealing with petabytes of data and things like that, you're still using Python in many cases to write algorithms to parse through that stuff. All right, so to get started with Python and any sort of modern writing code these days, like you're going to want to have some sort of environment to write your code in. You could actually use your notepad and write your actual Python, like this is Python right here. You could write it right in your notepad if you wanted, but nobody ever wants to do that. So you want to have something to write your code in. I recommend Visual Studio Code because it has this Python extension that we can install on it, and it just makes our life a lot easier when it comes to writing Python. And it's all completely free, so it's cross-platform and it's free. So I would say get started with that if you don't have any other preference already. But it's up to you. So if you have some other development environment, it's completely up to you if you want to use that. There's plenty of other options out there, but this is, I think, one of the most popular right now. So this has an installer, so just go ahead and download and install it. Once you open it up, it's going to look like this, and you're going to have like a welcome screen, something similar to this. All right, so the next thing you need to install in order to actually write Python code is Python can be thought of as an actual program that you have to download and install on your machine. So again, similar to other software applications, Python is going to have an installer that's cross-platform. And again, it's free to use. So for whatever operating system you have, you need to go through the installation process. If you are on Windows, the only thing I will caution is when you go through the install process, make sure you have the option of adding Python to your path, and then go through the installer. So download and install, and then just make sure that option is checked. So after you install that, you should be able to go to your command prompt or terminal, and by making sure that Python was added to the path, you should be able to just simply type Python, and it's going to fire the local Python environment where you can write code right into it. If that does not work, it means Python's not installed correctly, or it's not added to your path so that Windows or Mac or whatever doesn't know what Python means. So you need to either reinstall, or if you've installed, you might need to restart your machine in order for all the effects to take place. On Windows, I know you could just simply restart your Explorer if you know how to do that, but just simply restarting your machine is just ensure to make sure that the installation was complete. But other than that, if it doesn't work, it just means that Python is not added to your path, so you need to Google that for your machine. All right, so now let's go ahead and look at how to configure Visual Studio Code to use Python. Number one, we need to go ahead and install the most popular Python extension, and by doing that, you're going to have these icons on the left-hand side. If you click on the square icon, that's going to be for your extensions, and then we just have to search for Python. So here you can see that I already have it installed on mine, but you're not, and it's going to say install for any one that you don't have. So make sure you click install, and then you're going to want to reload the page. It'll ask you to do that, so make sure you do that. And also make sure it's the right Python extension. It should be this one from Microsoft, and you can see there's like almost 30 million downloads on it, so it's really, really popular. Once you have that, we need to go ahead and open up a folder to where we want to write our code. And I'm going to go ahead and put mine inside this tutorials Python directory, and we're going to call this, this is my Python 2019 series, so I'm going to put this in the 2019 folder, and I'm going to select that folder as being my Python project. So now if you have this Explorer option clicked, you're going to see that there's no files in here. So let's go ahead and create our first Python file. So we'll just call this test, and the reason in order for the computer and everything to know that you're dealing with Python, you have to name a file appropriately. And the appropriate way to name a Python file is with a py extension. So .py. So whatever your file name it needs to have a .py, and that way you can see the editor knows that it's Python, and that's why the icon now shows up. So we can write Python in here, and we're going to get proper highlighting and formatting and stuff like that. So we can type hello world. This will be our first Python program. And now to run it from the editor, what we're going to do is click on this little debug icon. And then we're just going to simply say that we need to, we're going to click on the gear icon because we need to add some configuration. So we're going to say add configuration, press play. All right, so when you add a configuration, it should have all this different information in here, and it should create this Python configuration file for you. So now when we go to the debug icon, we're going to have these different options of being able to say, okay, how do we want to run this thing? So I'm just going to say, you know what? I'm going to use the integrated environment. I'm going to run it from there. So now this is not going to work because actually it's now trying to execute the config file, and I don't want to do that. So I need to go over and make sure my Python file is selected. And then when I go to my debugger, I can now run the test.py file, and you can see that we're getting the output there. I can also put breakpoints on the code and stop the execution right then and there as well. So if I press play, you can see it stops, and now the editor's saying, hey, we're stopped at this line. So if I say, you know what, let's go ahead and proceed, I can do that by saying go ahead and step into, and simply it's just going to go ahead and exit the program here. So then we keep going through, it's going to eventually exit out. But you can see the output of the Python program is done right there. So we're using Visual Studio Code to do that. It's just a very clean way of writing all your Python code, and everything should just be kind of organized inside of this Python project directory that we created, and you could call it whatever you want for your project, but all your Python code for that project should be in like the same folder. So first things first, Python is a object-oriented language, and if you're not familiar with that concept, you're not going to get it right away. It actually takes like many years to actually get all of the computer theory and everything that goes into something like object-oriented programming and why that's used and why it's important. But you can think of it as simply that it's about code reuse, and that ultimately there are these objects or these classes, and those are the blueprints that say, okay, this is what this thing does. So like a blueprint is like a blueprint of a building, right, or a factory, and it says what the factory outputs and things like that. So that's what each class does, but the classes have the ability to inherit from each other. So this one is like a grandfather, this one's a father, this one's a child, but the child here is going to have everything the grandfather had, everything the father had, and it's going to have its own special abilities. So we can think of it in a different diagram. So it's really all about classes being blueprints, and they're just instructions to say, okay, when you build an object from this class, this is what it's going to have. But each object has the ability to pass in different attributes, like, you know, what type of color it should be, what type of steering wheel it should have, and all that stuff. But ultimately, you know, the base class of a car is going to have this, you know, this base structure that, you know, those children classes could also inherit. So you could even have like, you know, a class of an automobile that then has a class of car that inherits from automobile or something like that. And then, or, you know, vehicle or moving object or anything like that. You know, it's all really comprised of classes, and Python is no different. Everything that you can do in Python, from adding stuff to inserting things to taking things out, like they all have their own methods and abilities on them, because they're all just objects that got created from classes all the way to its core. So Python here has what are called built-in functions, and these things are actually built into the core library itself. So you would never want to create anything that overrides any of these built-in functions that Python provides. And they're very standard things like this. If you read the actual documentation, it's talking about like a file stream and sys, like std out, like what does that mean? But ultimately, like when you go back to the older languages like C, Python is a language that was created on top of C. The print statement itself is basically telling your console, your computer, to write text to your monitor. So that's what print is doing. Behind the scenes, there's quite a bit more work there, but Python sums it all up by simply saying, oh, you want to print something to the screen, which is actually quite common in programming for many, many reasons. There's this built-in function to do it. If you go to the Python documentation, you can see that this is part of built-in functions here, and then it tells you all about it. So even the print built-in function has like all these abilities to take in stuff. So you can pass in different arguments and everything to make it act differently, but then it has a default behavior, because you can see all we did was just pass in this hello world. And we're going to see ultimately the different types that Python has, but I'll go into that in a different video. But that is ultimately how Python is broken down. There's going to be classes and objects, and every object in Python is going to have the ability to do some sort of special behavior, whether it's writing something to the screen, whether it's reading something from a file, changing the way like the text looks or something like that, changing the color of the page. Like, there's all kinds of different things that can be done, and a lot of that stuff you're going to see has that ability is on some of the built-in functions and objects that Python has. And then also some of the custom objects that you're going to create, you're going to be able to attach all kinds of crazy behavior to them, because ultimately it's an object, and then you're going to be just adding things to that object. So if we look again at our diagram, you can think of the print function as being something that was derived from a class, and it has the ability to do custom behavior. And obviously the custom behavior is the argument or the value that you pass to it. In our case, it was just whatever sort of message we passed to it. And it's going to output. So like, no matter how many times we call it, if we pass in a different message and we say, oh, okay, be green, be blue, be red, like it's the same function can be reused over and over again, because it's really just an object that has like a special ability to do something. In case of the print function, it just simply prints something to the screen, but it does have the dynamic ability to print whatever it is that you pass to it, right? Any sort of combination of text. It doesn't matter how long the text is or how short the text is, or like what sort of characters you use, or there are certain caveats to that actually, but not going to get into any sort of complications there. But ultimately it's about code reuse, classes, and objects, and that's how Python is structured.